This is Tuesday, May the 6th, 2025. My name is Kevin Mulqueen. I'm a retired English teacher living in Ho Chi Minh City in Vietnam. For decades I have loved the work of Thomas Hardy. I've read and reread his major novels a number of times. I love his poetry. Very recently, in the last few days in fact, I decided to reread Jude the Obscure for the fourth time. I think it's the fourth time. It might be the third. It's either the third or the fourth. And I wrote about it immediately after finishing the book. And I've decided now to read out what I wrote. It may be of interest to some Hardy enthusiasts on YouTube. Yep, I love Hardy, and I just want to share my thoughts about Jude the Obscure. Okay, here goes. I'm reading from two sheets of paper. This won't take very long, actually. Okay, here goes. I have just finished reading Jude the Obscure for the fourth time. I first read it in my early 20s. I went to Leeds University and it was one of the set books on the novel course. Jude the Obscure was the one they selected. I don't think it's as good as Tess actually, but it's a really interesting book and they have their reasons for selecting that one. That was back in 1970. The third time I read it many years ago, I vowed never to read it again because I think it is artistically flawed and inferior to Hardy's three best novels. Now, in descending order: Tess of the D'Urbervilles, number one; Mayor of Casterbridge, close seconds; Far from the Madding Crowds gets the bronze. That's my third choice. I recently reread Tess with great enjoyment and decided to have another go at Jude. I did not have a copy, but found a second-hand copy online which was duly delivered to my house. I'm old-fashioned in my preference for paper books rather than e-books. I have a soft spot for Jude the Obscure because some of the action takes place in Old Brickham, Hardy's Wessex name for the Berkshire town of Reading, where I was born and grew up. Moreover, Jude and his women, Arabella and Sue, stay at the George Hotel, based on a real hotel of the same name on the corner of King Street and Minster Street in Reading. I used to pass the George Hotel all the time on my excursions to Reading Town Centre. Okay, now after that little introduction, let me start critiquing the novel. Jude is a big book, 490 pages long in my Penguin Popular Classics edition. Unfortunately, this edition has no explanatory notes, unlike other Penguin Hardys, where the author's many biblical and literary and cultural references are glossed. This was not a major impediment, though, to my enjoying the novel, but I would have preferred a glossary. I was more impressed with Jude than I had expected. I still rate it Hardy's fourth best novel, slightly ahead of The Woodlanders and The Return of the Native. I remember John Arlott's, the great critic, commentator, I remember John Arlott's high praise of Jude. He had never before been so moved by a novel, and the endorsements of other readers. And I agree that it is a very rich and powerful story. Hardy is a consummate storyteller, an ingenious weaver of plots. Now, this is partly owing to the serialisation of his novels. Jude was first published in 1894 to 95 in an abridged form in Harper's New Monthly magazine as Heart's Insurgent, terrible title, before the unexpurgated publication in book form in 1895. Hardy had to keep his magazine readers titillated, hence the abundance of cliffhangers and unforeseen happenings. Because of its frosty reception by the Victorian reading public, Jude was Hardy's final novel. Thereafter, he devoted himself to poetry. Although very tame by modern standards, the 1895 novel was deemed scandalous and blasphemous because mainly of its attack on marriage, and also because of certain scenes and details considered salacious, rather too sexy for 1895. The Bishop of Wakefield famously threw his copy of Jude the Obscure into the fire, and it was nicknamed Jude the Obscene by at least one reviewer. Today, the problem with the novel is not so much its morality as its artistic integrity. Now let me point out the book's artistic flaws. The backbone of the novel is the relationship between Jude and Sue. At times, I found their conversations tedious and pretentious, but on the whole, I enjoyed them. Anthony Burgess once said he hated romans à thèse, that is to say, novels written for the purpose of illustrating and defending a philosophical, political, or religious doctrine. That was why Burgess disliked Golding's Lord of the Flies. Well, he probably hated Jude also because it is heavily didactic in places, full of negative views about marriage. These are surely Hardy's own views, and he uses Sue and Jude as his mouthpieces. Like D.H. Lawrence, who hammers home ad nauseum his ideas about society and human happiness, Hardy devotes many paragraphs to attacking the Victorian concept of marriage. I found this rather monotonous and excessive. There is nothing like this in Tess of the d'Urbervilles or the Mayor of Casterbridge, which is one reason why I prefer those novels to Jude the Obscure. The most glaring flaw in Jude's is surely Little Father Time, a symbolic caricature who does not belong in a realistic novel. He is a direct expression of Hardy's own pessimism, and his death is absurdly melodramatic. Before hanging himself, Little Father Time murders the other children and leaves behind a message, "Done, because we are too many," which is touching but terribly contrived. Moreover, the two murdered little children are never given names, almost as if Hardy put them into the story as an afterthought. The main focus throughout the novel is Jude's relationship with Sue Brighthead, and for a short while, Little Father Time. Jude and Sue's two biological offspring are never described by the author or referred to by the couple. They are practically invisible until they die. This is poor and unrealistic writing because, as with all normal parents, the love and welfare of their biological children would surely be uppermost in the minds of Jude and Sue. Another glaring flaw is the quantum leap from Jude and Sue sleeping separately to suddenly having two of their own children with another one on the way. This deserves explanation. As it stands, it is barely credible. Perhaps Hardy felt too constrained by Victorian morality to be able to describe the progression from a non-sexual to a sexual relationship. But the modern reader would like to know how Jude finally persuades Sue to sleep with him and bear his children. The remarriages of Jude and Sue to Arabella and Phillotson are scarcely believable. The reader can just about comprehend Sue's rationale for reuniting with Phillotson, done out of a sense of duty, but it stretches credulity given her love for Jude and physical loathing of the other. Even less comprehensible and more contrived is Jude's remarriage to Arabella. Unlike Sue, he kind of sleepwalks into it, advancing no solid reasons. Given Jude's love for Sue and contempt for Arabella, the reader is baffled. No doubt the magazine readers of 1895 would have applauded Sue's correct decision and rejoiced over the cessation of her illicit relationship with Jude. In his essay on Hardy's poem In Death Divided, Clive James, who I think is a great critic, highlights a blemish and writes, Hardy was a professional striving hopelessly for amateur status. Well, the same can be said for all of Hardy's novels and for Jude's in particular. The artistic blemishes are manifold, but Hardy's greatness as a novelist, his ability to captivate the reader through characterization, description, and especially plotting, shines through. Okay, that's what I wrote about Jude the Obscure. It took me, I think, 5 days to read it. It was an absolute joy, really, in spite of all my criticisms. Well, I hope this little talk is of some interest to some of you out there. Thank you.